we have Jay Karandikar here, who is our funder, who will be first presenting a bit of information about vegan grants, our mission, our vision, a bit about the team and the projects that we do support. And then we will be opening up for a Q&A session afterwards. So if you don't mind, please do use the Hoover app and put your questions in there. If there's one that you particularly like, upvote that, because we will prioritize the ones that do get the most upvotes. And if you'd like to ask your question in person, I will be able to provide you with a microphone during the Q&A session. So I'll hand over to Jay and we'll get started.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Kyle. And hi, everyone. It's great to be here with all of you, at least virtually. I wish I could be there in person, but hopefully one of these days I'll get a chance to go to Vietnam. But I was thinking that I would get started by giving a bit of an overview on who we are, what we do, and then I want to hopefully spend most of the time on your questions. But I think before we do that, it'll be helpful to give you some of the background. So this is our team here. As you can see in the top left, my dad Satish and I are the funders of this organization. Krista was originally going to be giving this talk, but she was unfortunately not able to make it. But she is the Chief Philanthropy Officer of Vegan Grants, so she oversees the team and helps to set the strategy and review the grants. Shaleen is our Director of Finance and Operations. He's the one who manages our back-end systems and helps to manage the logistics of getting the money to our grantees. Shilpi is his wife, and she's an accountant, so she helps to make sure that all of our financial books are in order. Lori is the newest member of our team. She is our philanthropy officer, so she helps Krista in reviewing our pre-applications and our applications, which I'll go more into detail on later. Kyle is, as you have there in the room with you. Kyle, he's as you said, our systems automations and AI specialist. So he's been helping to get our organization more up to speed with all of the AI advancements that have been happening. So I'll go into more detail on some of the AI features we've incorporated into our system. And he's also, since he's so knowledgeable on AI, he's also just been helping generally organizations in the vegan movement. So if you have a chance to talk to him during this conference, I recommend you take advantage of that. And finally, Kelly, his wife, is our social media impact analyst. So for any of our grantees that do social media work, she analyzes their social media presence, and she also helps to give them some suggestions on how they can improve their social media activities. So this here is probably the most important slide in the whole presentation, because it gives you an idea of what we're all about. So as you can see, our mission is to fund activism that reaches a mainstream and or influential audience, message in a cost-effective way, and our vision is a vegan world. So the reason that I've that I've underlined those three buckets is that those are really the three main criteria that we look at when we're evaluating grants. So if you want to apply for funding from us, you may want to think about whether your work fits into these three buckets. And when you are submitting your grant application, you may want to think about which aspects of those work do fit into these three buckets and how you can best highlight that. So I'll just explain a little bit more about our three criteria. On the mainstream and or influential audience, the idea here is that we don't want to be funding work that involves vegans talking to vegans, because we think that that's generally not the best way to go out there and help the animals, that we need to be reaching people who are not vegan already. The second point about a vegan diet or menu change message, there are many different ways to try to persuade people, to try to influence behavior, but at the end of the day, there has to be some kind of a clear ask that whatever kind of work it is that we're doing, people need to come away with the message that the next time they sit down to eat with a fork in their hands, they have to have something in their minds that will encourage them to make a different choice with their diet. And the third point is also crucial, cost-effective way. We have limited resources, so we need to try to allocate them as effectively as possible. So we want to get the most bang for the buck with our funding. So the key point here is that we have a variety of different kinds of entities that we use depending on what the project is that we're funding, whether the work is done by an individual or an organization, and what part of the world it's in. We might use a different entity to fund, but as far as you're concerned, you don't really need to worry about any of that. We just use vegan grants as an umbrella term that you can refer to without worrying about the back-end processes of how we actually get the funding to you. So vegan grants is not actually a legal entity in itself, but it's just an umbrella term that we use to make your life easier. And so, as I just suggested, we fund both individuals and organizations. It doesn't matter. So sometimes if you talk to some funders in the US, they may only fund organizations that are registered 501c3 organizations in the US, primarily for tax reasons. That restriction doesn't apply to us. We just want to be able to get the funding to wherever it needs to go to be as effective as possible. And similarly, we fund worldwide. So I imagine that many of you in the audience are probably based in Asian countries, and that can be a challenge for some funders to get money to Asian countries, but we have experience funding grantees in these countries, and so we worked through those challenges before. We know how they work, so that's not an issue for us. And so there are two ways that you may get funding from us. You can either get a direct grant from us as vegan grants, or you can get an indirect grant. So I'll focus first on the direct grant aspect, and then I'll go into more detail later about what I mean by an indirect grant. So the process for a direct grant involves these 5 steps. And I'll go into these steps in more detail, but the reason that I'm going through all of this information is that I want to demystify the process for you, because especially depending on how much fundraising experience you have, you may or may not be familiar with how the whole process works, but hopefully with this information, the whole experience will be easier for you to navigate. So the first step is the pre-application process. So this is what the form looks like. This is a page on our website that is easily publicly available. You can go to the website and fill out this form if you're interested. And you can also feel free to share this form with anyone who you think might be a good fit. And as you can see, it's a pretty short and easy to fill out form. And the idea behind that is that we want you all to make the most effective use of your time. So we want to get a general idea of what it is that you're doing or are hoping to do. And that way we can make a quick assessment of whether or not it's a fit for us. So we don't want you wasting time filling out a longer application form if we know from the beginning that it's not a good fit for us. So that's why this exists as a tool to save your time. And then the next step, after you have filled out the form, you will get either an invitation to apply or an explanation of why we don't think that it's a good fit. And of course, at this point, if you think that we haven't understood some aspect of your work, or you think that there was something that was left out in the pre-application process, you are welcome to give that feedback and explain further and react in some way to the explanation that we've given. And the third step will be this new grantee enrollment process. And the idea here is that we want to get all of the critical information about your organization into our system so that we have that for all of our records. And also during this enrollment process, you will get your grantee ID. So that way, whenever you apply for grants in the future, it could be years from now, all of those applications, all of those grants, all of that information is all tied together to this single grantee. So that helps us keep the information organized on our end. And then finally, this is where you get to talk about the actual work that you're doing. This is the grant application. And the questions will depend on, for example, if you are an individual or if you're an organization. For example, for organizations, you might ask for some background information on the bylaws, board of directors. Of course, that doesn't apply for individuals. But this is where we really get to the substance of your work to try to understand it better. And then this is the most exciting step. This is where you finally, after putting in all that hard work, you get our decision. So that could be one of three options. It could be either just an outright approval or denial via email, or it could be a Zoom meeting if we think that we want to find out more, ask some clarifying questions before we come to a final decision. So all of those 5 steps that I talked about were the direct granting process. But as I mentioned a few slides ago, there are 2 ways you can get funding from us, either via a direct grant or via an indirect grant. So you can see here a list of our re-granters. By re-granters, I mean that we give a pool of funding to these organizations, and then these organizations each have their own application processes. They find organizations that they think are doing good work, and they then distribute those funds that we've given them. So if you want to apply for funding for from these organizations, it'll be a different process from the one that I showed you in the previous slides. Each of these have their own set of questions, their own way of going about things. So you'll have to contact each of these organizations directly. But the reason that it's important to know that these are our re-granters is that we will sometimes give matching funds. So for example, we might say that we agree to contribute X dollars if you are able to raise another X dollars from other funders. In other words, if you're able to match the X dollars that we want to give. But if we do that, it won't count if you get funding from one of these re-granters, because the funding is coming from the same pool of money. If you want to match the X dollars, it has to come from funders that are not on this list. So then once you finally get to the stage of actually being a grantee, you'll have something called a magic link. That will be your main access point to our whole grant management portal. So that link will be pretty important. So I would suggest that you bookmark it, save it somewhere, have it somehow easily accessible, because you'll probably want to be referring to it on a regular basis. So I'll just go through the 4 main categories of information that you'll be able to access using your Magic Link. The first is a list of pending tasks. So, for example, we generally require our grantees send us acknowledgement letters, which they can upload using this website. And that's important for us because we need it for our tax records. And so it's also important for us because we generally check that before we give further funding. So you'll be able to see a list of all of the actions that we're expecting you to complete. And another important category is reports. This is where you get to tell us about the work that you've been doing. And these are the 4 main categories of reports that we generally have. So donation match reports, those are for the matching donations that I mentioned. As and when you get donations in, you can tell us about them using the donation match report, and then we'll be able to use that information to send the matching funds to you. Then there's the itemized expense report. So those are for certain cases where we are funding specific projects. You can share with us the expenses that you've incurred. There's the impact report. This is where you get to tell us about all of the good work that you're doing, all of the impact that you're having for the animals. And then the year-end financial report, that's where you tell us about your overall high-level revenues and expenses for the year. That's the kind of information about the financial health of the organization that we like to track. And the third piece of information you can see is a list of all of the donations that you've received from us, the amounts, the dates, and so on. So in case you ever need to check that information, you'll have that available here. And then finally, this is a new technological development for us. This is something that Kyle has helped us to implement. This is a frequently asked questions chatbot. So if there's any information that you want to get a quick answer to, you can just type your question into here, and hopefully this information will get you a quicker answer. Of course, you can also email us and contact us in other ways, but sometimes if you just want a quick answer, you might be able to get it using this tool. So this is what our website looks like. You can see the URL here, vgrants.org. And also importantly, we have this suggestions form that you can fill out. So if you have any ideas for us, anything that you think could be improved, we're always trying to make our procedures more efficient. So always happy to hear your ideas. And this is an important message I want to leave you all with. At the end of the day, all of you are the ones who are really doing the important work for the animals. We're just enablers for you, helping you to do your work more efficiently. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you all for joining us. And now I'm happy to open it up to questions.
Thank you, Jay. All right, so we're going to open up for questions, and I'm happy to do either through the Hoover app, or if anyone would like to ask, I'm happy to bring the microphone to you. We already have one question.
Hello, thank you very much. It was very informative and it's very important, of course. Could you please tell, in terms of the efficiency of funds spent, are there any preferences in terms of like regions or directions of the work of organizations, depending on what they are doing?
So just to clarify your question, you're asking if we prefer grantees in certain parts of the world over others?
Yes, in terms of efficiency, yes, of like effective altruism, yeah, the money spent, and maybe you have certain preferences in terms of certain directions of work, depending like investigations, or I don't know, like plan-based campaigning and so on.
I see. Yes, so definitely in terms of geography, two focus areas for us are Asia and Latin America, exactly for the reasons that you mentioned, that in terms of cost effectiveness, we can get a much bigger bang for the buck in those areas. So for example, Brazil seems to be a bit of a bright spot for our vegan movement. And also the other big reason for that is that in terms of the forecasted meat consumption, the bulk of that increase in the coming years, it seems, is going to be coming from Asia. So that's why it's important. Of course, work anywhere in the world is important, but if we really want to make a dent in the number of animals suffering, it's going to be crucial that we do that work in Asia. In terms of your other question, I would say that we really fund a broad spectrum of approaches. So that could be anything from documentaries to investigations to institutional meat reduction in corporate cafeterias. So as you can imagine, it's pretty difficult to compare cost effectiveness across those different buckets. So of course, we do try to fund the most effective programs overall, but I would say where the cost effectiveness comparisons are most helpful are when we're comparing two options within the same category. So for example, if we are looking at two institutional meat production programs, we can more easily compare the cost effectiveness of those two against each other. But it is a much more difficult task to compare the cost effectiveness of one program in one category to one in a totally different category.
Thanks, Jay. Any questions from hands? Otherwise, I'll move to the Hoover app. No. All right. So we got some questions coming in through Hoover, so please feel free to keep adding them there and upvote any that particularly resonate with you, because those will be the ones we prioritize. So the first question is, are there any grants available by the organizers or any platform for the cutting edge research study related to vegan and meat consumption in developing countries? So is the person here who asked that question? No, they asked it and hope to get an answer. Okay, so we'll just hand over to Jay for the answer to that one.
Sure. So generally, research is not our main focus. We try to allocate the bulk of our funds to direct work. But of course, we do recognize that research can play an important role. We can learn some insights that will help us to allocate our funds more effectively, to allow our grantees to work more effectively. But we are very selective. So we really don't like doing research for the sake of research. If you're applying for funding for research, then the key question that you would need to answer is, how is this research going to make what we're doing more effective? Is it going to be a case of learning which strategies are most cost effective, or learning which, for example, which countries we should focus on? it has to be somehow directly tied for impact for animals. So in your application, you would have to make that connection really clear.
Great, thank you. So the next question, I think you did answer part of this in the previous one, but it asks about cost efficiency has been recently added as an important factor to determine the grantee. And I think this next part is probably something we can potentially add on. What metrics do you use to measure cost effectiveness?
So it would depend a lot on what the kind of organization is. But to give maybe a couple of examples, for organizations that are doing institutional meat reduction, trying to get vegan meals in school cafeterias, let's say, the metric there could be number of vegan meals divided by dollars spent to achieve that outcome. Or if this is a 30-day vegan challenge organization, it could be number of signups divided by dollars spent. So of course, at the end of the day, we're trying to measure the number of animals we're helping. Normally, we're not able to measure that number directly. So what we need to do is figure out what is the best proxy for that, and then put that number in the numerator. So if that's number of people signing up, number of people attending your event, we try to figure out the best kind of metric along those lines that we can use.
Great, thank you. So just a reminder to everyone, do feel free to pop your questions in Hoover, and I will do one more and then see if there's anyone in the audience who'd like to ask anything. The next question is, are there any available grants for artists who may want to use their art for activism? Second part to this is it a good idea to start a charity through this, I suppose, with that idea in mind?
So yes, possibly, but let me just go back to the slide on our mission statement, because anything that we look at is going to be filtered through the lens of these three factors. So the question is going to be, if you are creating art, these are the three questions that we're going to be asking. Is that what kind of audience is it going to reach? It shouldn't be art that is catered towards vegans. It should be art that somehow has some ability to reach a wider audience. So you would need to define what is the audience that you are hoping to reach and how do you plan to reach it. The second question is going to be, how are you going to incorporate the vegan message into your art? It's, of course, that'll depend on what the kind of the art is, but you would need to explain, when someone experiences this art and later on they makes their food choices, how are the seeds going to have been planted so that they will hopefully make different decisions? And then, of course, how much money is it going to cost? And then we're going to compare that number to the number of people that you hope to reach. And the one other point I want to make on this is that, as I mentioned, we do have our regranters, and there is one regranter in particular, the Culture and Animals Foundation. This is in the second row on the right. They generally are particularly interested in funding art. So if you are interested in an art-related project, you might consider it making more sense to apply via them as a regranter, perhaps, rather than applying via our grant portal. And in terms of whether it's a good idea to start a nonprofit, I would say that that's really a hard question to answer in the abstract without knowing more details. But I would generally, when people think about starting nonprofits, that can cause a lot of overhead for people to create their own entity, then They have to worry about their own payroll, their own HR. There are a lot of moving parts that can occur. So it's important to be able to justify. So the question I would ask in that case is there a way to get started in a more lean way, perhaps without creating a whole new nonprofit? Like, for example, could you apply as an individual, experiment with creating the kind of art that you have in mind, and then if it really takes off, then maybe consider starting a nonprofit at that point?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Jai. Any questions from the crowd? Anyone want to raise your hand? I'll bring the mic to you. Oh, you wrote another one here? All right, we'll keep going through Hoover, unless you wanted to ask it. Yeah. Otherwise, I'm hugging the mic. I'll keep talking.
Like as long as this topic of art was already raised, we have quite positive outcomes, experience in terms of like vegan art projects, exhibitions, and so on, like street performances in Georgia. And we would like to know if it's just our our case, or generally, what do you think? How effective like vegan art, animal rights related art can be? What do you know? What do you think? What do your colleagues consider to be how it is? Thank you.
Sure. Well, first of all, that's it's quite interesting to hear that you've been having that success. So I'd love to learn more after the presentation. If you want to reach out by email or by our website, be curious to learn more about that. But to answer your question about art, so it's a bit of a broad category. So it depends on how you define the boundaries of art. Like, for example, you might include films in the category of art, and as we know, films have been quite impactful. For example, Earthlings is an older documentary that I think has inspired a lot of people in the movement. But more recently, we've had documentaries like Seaspiracy that have had a lot of success. Another category that I think is interesting that we don't have too much of so far is fiction books. I think that fiction has inspired people to think big in some other areas. Like, for example, in the AI boom, of course, there's a lot of technology and science that goes into it. But as a topic, some people who got interested by science fiction, by reading books such as I, Robot by Isaac Asimov and so on. It got the topic very much into the popular culture. So I do wonder if that's an area that maybe we're not taking advantage of as much as we could be to really inspire people. And my sense is that fiction books are much more popular generally than nonfiction books. It's a much larger number of people who read them. So yeah, hopefully we can start to find better ways to make use of those kinds of strategies.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And I was speaking to someone yesterday who's exploring that idea. So it'll be interesting to see how that progresses. All right, we are onto our next question that asks, could the grant be used to pay salaries for the team members?
Yes, definitely. So by default, in a lot of the cases, we will give an unrestricted grant. So sometimes the grant will be restricted to a particular program. In other cases, it will just be an unrestricted grant, generally to the organization as a whole. And we totally understand that for a lot of organizations, the people working at the organization are really the crucial asset of the organization. So a lot of times salaries for the people working there will be one of the biggest expenses. So we totally understand that that's a standard practice for nonprofits, and that is generally one of the intended uses of grants.
Great, thank you. There's been a couple of questions that have come in on this topic, so I might merge the two questions together. And they both related to grants related to non-animal testing. So the one in particular says, when you talk about vegan grants, does vegan also cover ending animal testing, or does the word vegan cover only plant-based and farmed animal work? If it's the former, then what are the chances that an organization working to end animal testing would get funding?
So our focus is really on farm animals, because we've made the strategic decision that is the biggest and most compelling area for us to work on. Now, of course, a large number of animals do suffer in animal testing as well. That is definitely a worthy cause. But as far as applying for grants through vegan grants goes, we focus on farm animal issues.
Great, thanks. So there's a few people that just popped in. Just a reminder, we are in the Q&A session. Feel free to drop your question into Hoover. If you're brave, I can bring the microphone to you. Would anyone like to ask a question before I move on to the next one through the app? Last chance? No? All right, next question through the app. Is the organization applying for the grant, or must the organization applying for the grant be vegan, or solely working for vegan or meat reduction advocacy?
The organization has to be involved in reducing the amount of farm animals suffering in some way, shape, or form. So I'm not sure 100% what the questioner had in mind, but if the question is about, does the organization have to have 100% vegan ask, or for example, could they have some kind of a reducitarian ask? Could they have some program where they're not asking people to go vegan, they're just asking people to reduce their consumption of animal products? So in that case, yes, that is totally within the realm of the kind of work that we fund. One thing that we like to say internally is that every bite is an opportunity. So it doesn't matter if you get a reduction from converting one person fully to vegan or converting 10 people partially to vegan. So long as we're making progress on that issue, that works for us.
Great, thank you. Next question we have here, what are the sizes of the funds that you offer?
So it's a very wide range. So it could range from a few $1,000s to in the millions of dollars, depending very much on the stage of where you are, how many other funders you have. Generally, for example, we try to avoid being more than 50% of an organization's budget, though there are sometimes some exceptions to that. But yes, it's a big spectrum of sizes that we fund.
Great, thanks. A question just came in. Do you provide grants for independent activists or only for organizations? So I think there may be someone who just came in because in the presentation, Jay did go through this. And yes, Vegan Grants does fund both individuals and organizations. Next question, which is really, I think, a really good one here. We've got, why does the movement in Asia receive less funding than the global north, despite 75% of farm animals being in the global south?
That is a very good question. So I think that there are a few factors here. So one is that the majority of the funders in this movement are based in the United States. And so they tend to maybe see organizations in the United States more, to be more familiar with their work. The organizations in the United States are more established, have maybe more experience in fundraising. So there's a historical aspect as well in terms of how long organizations have been in place in the United States and also some parts of Europe, UK particularly. But I think that the crux of your question is a very important one, that if you look at the percentage of our movement's resources that go to various countries, it is very much not in accordance with both the number of animals that are exploited currently by country and also the projected growth in terms of number of animals. So we're very much aware of that problem. So we do already fund some grantees in Asia, and we are constantly looking for more grantees in Asia. And that's one of the reasons why Kyle is there today and why I'm speaking now. We want to encourage organizations in Asia to apply, because it is really a very important part of the world for farm animals.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So yeah, this is your opportunity to jump onto vgrants.org, jump to the grants page, click on pre-application, and simply fill in that form. It is a short little form just to get started, get the process started, and we can progress from there. So it looks like we have exhausted the questions in Hoover. Any questions from the crowd? Oh, we have a hand. Great. I will bring the mic to you.
Okay, my question is about, do you offer accelerator or training before offering a grant? And why in Africa we get limited grants?
So I think it depends what kind of training you're looking for. Krista, who I mentioned earlier on the team slide, she runs a strategic planning class. So that can be an opportunity for people to learn about a lot of the different aspects of running a nonprofit. So if you're interested in learning those details, feel free to reach out. Kyle can provide that information. You can sign up for Krista's class and hopefully get the information that you need that way. Also, for two particular areas, we do have our resident experts. We have Kyle, who has expertise in AI. So if you have AI related questions, he's the person to talk to. If you have social media related questions, Kelly is our expert on that topic. So she can help to advise organizations in the movement on that issue. But in terms of your second question about funding in Africa, I would say it's a similar answer to the earlier question about Asia, that it is very much an issue that has been on our minds, that in an ideal world, we would like to fund more in Africa. It is definitely an underserved region for our movement in terms of funding. So hopefully we can take some steps to change that. So if you have any projects that you think are worthwhile, please go to Vegan Grants and apply. Or if you know anyone who you think has worthwhile projects, and one issue for us is that we don't really have networks there. We don't have on the ground presence, but hopefully if you all can help to spread the word, we can start to fund more projects there.
Thank you. Any final questions from the crowd? Yes, we have one question.
Thank you. So, related to that, the organization applying should be vegan organization. Yeah, that was for me. What I meant is, I co-founded this organization called Animal Friends Jogja, and we work for companion animals, and also we then expanded our work for welfare, like cage-free advocacy, Then just this year, we started this pilot project on meat reduction as a part of the organization. Yeah, so would that work, or should I form a new entity?
Yes,
So-
I think, oh, sorry, Jay, I think that, yeah, is probably one question that didn't come up, but did come up at AFAD in DC, where we had earlier, was the difference between, yeah, welfare work and this meat reduction component side of it.
Yes, absolutely. That is an important clarification. So I'm glad that you asked that question. So we don't fund any welfare work. We only fund diet change work. So generally, a lot of the organizations that we fund only fund diet change work, but we are open to considering cases where the organization works on some welfare issues and some diet change issues. In that case, we would restrict our funding to the diet change portion of the organization's work. But what I would suggest, if you are in that situation and if you are interested in applying for funding, is that you go ahead and fill out the pre-application and explain the situation where you're an organization that does both welfare and diet change, but that you're going to be providing information about the diet change portion of the organization. And then once we actually get to the point of considering funding, then we can talk about what are the best ways that we can arrange our funding so that we're comfortable that our funding is in fact going to the diet change portion of your work.
Yeah, great, thank you. And it doesn't look like anything's been added to Hoover. Any other questions from the crowd? Last call. All right, so it is almost 11 p.m. where Jay is, so really like to thank you so much for staying up so late and answering all these questions, sharing with everyone about the mission and vision of vegan grants, and hopefully expanding more funding into this area that, as you all have identified, is in need of that. So please do jump on the VGrants website, fill in that pre-application form. Any questions, we do have a contact form that you can send us a query through that. I'm here today. You're more than welcome to come and ask me any questions. And I am going to do a shameless plug. I have an AI workshop directly after this. So please do come. We will be exploring AI, how it can make you more efficient and effective in your work. And so I'm sorry, Jay, I did have to throw that in there. But once again, thank you, Jay, so much for your time. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Big round of applause for Jay. Thank you.